A rough week in the markets with double digits drop for corn on Friday, and also significant drops for other commodities. Jerry Gidel is ready to analyze all of that right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So Jerry, how are you today? So kind of a rough week ending on Friday.
Yes, yeah. Well, the end of the week here was definitely not as impressive as things were happening there in the first couple of days, to say the least. We kind of came in with some firmer tones uh, uh, ahead of the 3 day weekend, and that because of some export sales, and but ended up. I thought maybe we'd see a little bit more of a choppy week because of the 3 day weekend, but yeah. But the key thing in this whole thing turns out to be that I think possibly hit some objectives that the market had had in the back of its mind here for 2 or 3 weeks. The $8 mark in nearby corn prices, and also the highs we had back in the spot prices back there at 1759, actually 1760 on nearby beans back at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, interestingly enough, we made a push up to those levels. We didn't end up seeing follow through on it here, though, ahead of the weekend.
Yes, and several issues are impacting the markets from the war worsening and the harvest in Argentina.
Yes, the couple different things, even some action over there in Brazil too, about how their tail end of their season is kind of going there on weather. The war situation, it looks like that the Russians have made a shift. They were originally trying to take a pincer movement on the capital there, and it turns up that they kind of ran out of enthusiasm for that. Now it looks like that they have decided to come in from the east and expand on their Donbass Donbass area, where they have some support and some previous gains there, and see what they can do with it. Mariupol, the seaport area there in the south east side of the country. Also, it looks like they pretty well bombed that into complete submission at this point. There is a little bit of a holdout there, but yeah, at this point, we'll see how that progresses. But the one thing it did do was open up some more opportunities for the Ukrainians to get some of their spring plantings in. There were some reports as high as 20-25% of their expected plantings. Now, that's always a tough one to judge at this time as to how much you should expect in the middle of a war zone. But that's the kind of numbers are around there. It has improved those expectations and ideas that they're going to get more than potentially more than half a crop this year. The biggest problem becomes is they don't really have a lot of storage for a huge crop. From the standpoint, they got a lot of stuff still staying in storage from this last year that hasn't been able to get out of the country. From that standpoint, on the Ukrainian beat.
And what are you seeing as opportunities for farmers right now?
Well, I think that in the short term here, they're all kind of concentrating here in the U.S. and around the world on this, how the spring plantings go in both Ukraine and also in North America here at this point. We've continued to have some pretty tough weather in the western half of the plain states here for wheat. And even some places in South and North Dakota have got also pretty dry conditions. And that rain activity just got through the Chicagoland area here this afternoon. And that the one thing that did happen, though, it didn't rain a lot in northern Missouri, central Illinois, central Indiana. and there is some more shower activity uh, early next week. But I think there's going to be a push to some extent on plantings. Some longer term forecasts, by the way, in the U.S. are trying to be more optimistic about temperatures being consistently in the 60s and 70s here in the Midwest, and at the same time, maybe not having as much rain as we've had to this point. But to some extent, this particular pattern we're in that seems to have jumped over the most of the western part of the U.S. still has not really been changed at this point. So that's going to be a very important area to watch as we go forward in the North America areas. Now, uh, you mentioned about the Argentine situation and it's interesting. We both have heard some interesting updates on the early part of the Argentine crop, where we all remember how nasty the weather was back in late December and January, and that's a period of time in Argentina when the first crop beans had really kind of matured a lot, the ones that they put in before the wheat harvest, and it looks like those particular beans really took it on the chin. They don't really have as much oh total weight or starch in them, along with the protein content isn't all that good. And so, that's a big deal if you just sell the beans to somebody else and they have to worry about what kind of quality you have. But in Argentina, they do a huge portion, probably what 75% or more of their crop, and this year it might be higher because of the total number of bushels available. That the quality of their meal and the number of tonnage doesn't look to be as strong, at least from the first part of the harvest. Now there is another significant portion of it that was planted later in the year, and the weather has been good at times, but it hasn't been outstanding either. There hasn't been huge amount of rain in parts of Argentina. The real rain that's happened since this whole drought situation has impacted was that area of Paraná, Mato Grosso do Sul, and Paraguay. Paraguay, their bean crop is less than half than they normally get at this point, and that also kind of impacts Argentina since they ship a lot of it through the Paraná River through Argentina. And then the other question is that yeah, we might have a slightly better second crop corn crop, but the first crop bean crop in that part of the world definitely was dinged up. Now, the real big question in Brazil right now is what does the second crop corn in Mato Grosso and Goiás and some of these other areas in the center west, as they call it, and that's it's a little iffy right now, and the forecast is not all that optimistic that the monsoon is going to come back here in a big way. Some people are already thinking it might have restarted retreating, and some forecasts have minimal moisture occurring in Mato Grosso between now and the middle of May. That would be quite interesting. I know that some pollination has already occurred up that direction, but at the same time, um, there's still some corn that's going to be impacted with minimal type of moisture available. And usually when the rain starts retreating, the heat starts building. So that's another feature that really clobbered last year's corn crop down in Mato Grosso and Goiás and other areas in the north and northeast. And so I don't know that I'm still a little cautious that the corn crop in Mato Grosso is really going to make it through here with the 116 million number that Conab put out here last month. I don't know if we're going to have a big change when we get those numbers in May from both the USDA and the Brazilian government, but at the same time, I have to say that there's still issues out there, and what kind of crop size we're going to have out of Brazil and Argentina.
Yeah, and you are speaking supply wise. Now, demand wise, I think the demand from cattle producer is going to shrink, right?
Well, the the U.S. cattle producers still are having 100% kind of things in the feed yards. The twist of it, surprisingly, for the cattle industry in the U.S. is is the fact that if this thing continues to be dry out there in the plain states, that kind of forces the hand of the backgrounders in the cattle cow calf guy that they need to move those animals into areas away from their pasture lands because they just don't have the feed out there for them. So if you're in that 600-700 pound range of cattle, you kind of tend to end up going to feed yards. If you're below that, you still try to have to put some hay on them, things like that. You sure don't want to start trying to fatten up a 500-pound cattle these days because the market wants to market these things more in the 1,200 to 1,500 pound situations. You start putting corn and heavy duty feed to them at 500 pounds, that doesn't work for what the world wants right now. But from the standpoint of the demand side of things, there's been a lot of people going back and forth, and it's about what China's demand is going to be, and you go. It's interesting in the fact that I've mentioned it before here that since the corn that's been trapped in Ukraine, uh, we haven't seen the immediate reaction of the Chinese to go buy it someplace else, and that means us. And at this point in time, uh, up to this point, they hadn't. Well, we had two different purchases over the last, say, month or 6 weeks. One, both of them a little over 1 million metric tons, split between old and new crop. Well, surprisingly, we happen to have another one of those announcements come out today. It didn't help our market today, and it was kind of one of those head scratchers that came along when that came. It was there before the pause, but it didn't seem to have much follow through. I think that what happened today is that the weather forecast for maybe warming up at the middle latter part of next week, maybe some less rains going through central Illinois, central Indiana today, kind of put people on the defensive about, well, the corn crop's going to get more of it in. And I don't disagree that the U.S. might have a little better chance to get more things planted next week, but I wonder if we're going to be able to race along and be all of a sudden back at or above normal. Next week's numbers, by the way, probably are pushing in the 15 to 20% level on Monday, and the possibility of that happening is pretty minimal at this point. And one of the wildest things that's still in our forecast is going to have another shot of snow up there in North Dakota in the northern plains. That could actually have a impact all the way through here, that some of the wheat and corn that was maybe being planned up in that part of the world, if they don't get some of the things starting to happen, that could actually roll some more things towards soybeans versus corn and wheat. So lots of things floating around these days in the world of U.S. plantings and what our final numbers might be.
And what else you will be watching next week?
Well, definitely we'll be watching the U.S. weather and how that really looks for the early part of May, and that. And it's twofold. We want to look at the Midwest plantings for corn and soybeans, but we also want to look at the implications of the size of the U.S. wheat crop if the rains continue to miss the western areas of Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, eastern Colorado, Oklahoma, and Texas. That puts more and more pressure on our corn output for this coming year. If we don't have some wheat that's available for potential feeding, we're not going to feed a lot, but there's always going to be some of it there. Other things looking forward, of course, the updates we get from the Black Sea and the conflicts going on there. From that standpoint, the other interesting twist will be as to what the Chinese continue to do there with their purchases. They're now up to maybe half or a little bit more than half of the stuff that has been kind of stuck in Ukraine. In that, and well, they think that's enough to get by, and they can pick up some other things later, or are they going to decide that maybe there's going to be a need to take advantage of some of the prices, particularly right now, at least. You know, we can still see a little softness into early next week, but I kind of feel like that there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty here in the U.S. Situation, what's going on in the Black Sea, and also, as we kind of mentioned earlier this evening, what's happening in South America. There's a lot of supplies and production that is really available normally to the world between going through of the next 3 to 6 months. Not so much maybe in the immediate future that is going to be out there competing against the U.S., but at the same time, normally the Brazilians have been strong competitors in, say, August through October here on supplying the world with corn. And we'll see what that is. That they were impressive last year, coming through with stuff. Even was a short crop, they did provide some stuff there, and so that's a feature that we got to look at going forward. But I kind of feel like that there's going to be some support on setbacks.
All right. Thank you very much.
You bet. Have a good weekend, and we'll see what next week brings.